map of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire reveals that vast area of Central and Southeastern Europe, which was formerly under the dominion of the Habsburgs and one of the world's largest and most powerful kingdoms. But the boundary lines of an empire are as changeable as the course of human events. And as a result of the last World War, Austria and Hungary were separated and reduced to small independent countries, while in the remaining territory, several new states were created, including Czechoslovakia, which derives its name from the two branches of the Slavic nation, the Czechs and the Slovaks. Praha, or Prague, the capital and largest city of Czechoslovakia, is picturesquely situated on the banks of the Vltava River. 1,000 years ago, Prague was already the capital of an independent Czech state, which at later periods assumed large proportions in Central Europe. Charles IV, the most famous ruler of the House of Luxembourg, made this city a center of arts and sciences for the Holy Roman Empire. And as far back as 1348, he erected numerous buildings and bridges, which rank today among the architectural treasures of medieval Europe. The famous Old Charles Bridge, for example, was built before Christopher Columbus was born, and even today it is one of the most useful of the 12 bridges which span the Vltava and connect the two sections of the city. After crossing the Charles Bridge, the first church to attract our attention is that of St. Nicholas, a perfect example of Baroque architecture and one of the most famous of the city's many old churches. Prague also has an ultra-modern atmosphere, convincingly illustrated by the activity of its main street. Our present interest, however, lies in the landmarks of Old Prague, such as the Tyne Church, built in the 14th century and famous the world over for its oddly shaped spires and turrets. This ancient church, being one of the oldest landmarks in Prague, has acted as a nucleus around which a section of the city has grown up, so that today the church is literally boxed in by the buildings which surround it. The old town square in front of the church has been a gathering place for important events which two famous old faces have looked down upon through centuries of time. One, the face of a Jewish clock with hands that move backwards over Hebrew letters. And the other, the face of a Christian clock, constructed in the year of 1480 and regarded as one of the mechanical wonders of the world. With the striking of the hours, this clock becomes a veritable beehive of activity, and every movement it makes harmonizes with the passing of time. As the apostles of Christ move by the open windows, presumably warning us to consider the importance of spiritual life, the figure of death moves a bony hand as if striking the hours, while the merchant beside him philosophically shakes his head as if to say, "What does it profit a man if he gains the whole world and suffers the loss of his soul?" On a natural elevation overlooking the city stands the historic old castle of Prague, parts of which are said to date back as far as the 10th century, when a patron prince of Bohemia was reigning over this land. It is now the official residence of the President of the Republic. During the World War, there were 3 private legions formed by Czech and Slovak volunteers in France, Italy, and Russia, respectively. And today, in their memory, these castle guards wear uniforms similar to those worn by the soldiers in those countries. Within the castle grounds, there is a quaint little thoroughfare referred to as Gold Street, because, according to tradition, it was here in these little houses that the old Jewish alchemists were imprisoned under orders to manufacture artificial gold for their freedom. The castle contains many things of interest, but there is a big parade going on in the city, which represents the provinces of the Republic, and we cannot afford to miss it, as it is virtually Czechoslovakia on parade. It is a custom among the boys in some of the communities of Czechoslovakia to elect kings to represent them in parades of this kind, and each king rides a colorfully decorated horse. A remarkable feature about this national parade is the complete absence of any display of military glamour or strength. Instead of guns, they carry violins, and the feet that once beat upon these pavements in military precision are now supplanted by feet that dance. And all this is simply an agrarian demonstration in which the peasants of the country go to town, as it were, in their homespun costumes and celebrate the results of a good harvest or anything else that can provoke a celebration. The casual observer may look upon this as just a colorful parade, but it is more than that. It represents the spirit of a people who have dedicated themselves to the cause of liberty, fraternity, and equality, a cause which reflects itself even in the face of the plainest peasant girl, and around which revolves the hope and the future of Czechoslovakia. The Paris Exposition was undoubtedly one of the most important events that happened in the year of 1937, if for no other reason than the fact that it brought together, for the first time in the history of world expositions, the official flags of 44 nations, which waved side by side in a spirit of international goodwill. With unbiased minds, therefore, let us review this modern spectacle, which glorified the arts and crafts of peace, and help to develop a better understanding between the peoples of a world that still has faith in the ideal of man's humanity to man. A panorama from the Eiffel Tower reveals how this international exposition was cleverly designed on the banks of the historic Seine River, in the heart of Paris itself. Many of the city's older landmarks, such as the bridges of the Seine and the Eiffel Tower, being cleverly utilized without jeopardizing the ultra-modern aspect of the exposition. And now we come to the pavilions which each nation contributed by way of representation at the exposition. The Canadian pavilion was an idealized version of one of Canada's many grain storehouses, and the adjoining pavilion of Great Britain was a modest representation of the British Empire. The Swedish pavilion had a charming simplicity, and that of Czechoslovakia was a model creation of future architecture. The United States pavilion was constructed according to American methods, featuring the typical setback design and the American Indian motif. In association with the United States Pavilion, it is fitting that we should show a monument on the Seine, which is one of the relics of the Paris Exposition of 1889, and a small duplicate of the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor, which was presented by France to the United States as a symbol of liberty, fraternity, and equality, upon which was founded two of the world's greatest democracies. France's colonies were well represented at the exposition, and nothing was more impressive than the pavilion of French Indochina. Perhaps the most impressive of the colonial pavilions was that of French West Africa, representing Senegal, the Ivory Coast, Dahomey, French Sudan, Mauritania, and other colonies with alluring and unfamiliar names. For a brief interval, our international tour was interrupted by a thrilling demonstration of water skiing in the Seine, one of the lighter features of the exposition. Towering over the Russian pavilion, we behold a monument which was generally conceded to be one of the masterpieces of the exposition. This gigantic statue, approximately 100 feet in height, is said to have been designed by a young girl in Russia, where it was modeled and shipped in sections to be assembled and set up as we see it here. Walking up the Avenue of Nations, we paused to admire the very colorful Egyptian pavilion, representing one of the world's oldest styles of architecture. The tower in the background was that of the Hungarian pavilion, around which the colorful life of a romantic people was faithfully reproduced. The native costumes of a people often reflect the spirit of the people themselves, and when a group of Hungarians get together in their native costumes, regardless of time or place, the inevitable consequence is a czardash. Representing Norway was a pavilion with a huge aluminum cascade over which a thin veil of water flowed in imitation of a typical Norwegian fjord. Next to the Norwegian pavilion, under a colorful array of flags, stood the Spanish pavilion. Here we were entertained by typical music and dancing, which associated itself with the province of Segovia in Spain. Just outside the Spanish Pavilion, in the center of the Avenue of Nations, was the so-called Fountain of Peace, considered to be the most beautiful aquatic display ever executed by the hand of man. The French have always been masters in the art of constructing artificial water displays, but they excelled themselves when they constructed in the Seine River the world's most colorful and sensational illuminated fountains. These beautiful fountains were manipulated by electricity, and the mastermind behind them sat at an organ-like instrument, literally playing the chords of color that we now behold. Vying with the fountains in their varying moods of color were the pyrotechnical displays, flashing lights and resounding noises which thrilled the thousands who witnessed them from the banks of the Seine. The millions of people who gathered here in an international spirit of peace and witnessed what their respective nations could do if the ugly spirit of war were submerged for all time, and each country, regardless of size or power, could safely devote its resources to the cause of peace on earth and goodwill toward men. By way of contrast with the more hectic civilization in which we live, let us turn for a brief moment to ancient India, which had its day of strife and confusion many centuries ago, when powerful Mughal emperors and Maharajas ruled the land and determined the way of life for almost a third of the world's population. We are at Amber, formerly the capital of Jaipur state, but now a deserted city, with its imposing palace no more than a landmark for visitors who come here from all parts of the world. There are several of these deserted cities throughout India, which are built at enormous cost and then suddenly abandoned by the whim of an extravagant ruler who apparently enjoyed the thrill of building new palaces and new cities. Incidentally, these elephants are taken out from the present capital city of Jaipur to Amber, a distance of about 5 miles, for the sole purpose of providing transportation for tourists who drive within sight of Amber by automobile and then explore the deserted city on the backs of elephants. But when the tourist trade is over, Amber again becomes a deserted city with no sign of life except the royal peacocks, which have never left their ancient capital, breeding through the centuries and finding in Amber enough to provide them with the necessities of life, the last vestige of color and regal pride living in the city of Amber. And now we come to the new capital of Jaipur state, known as Jaipur City, which was built over 2 centuries ago by the mathematician and astronomer Jai Singh, who aspired to make it the most wonderful city in India and succeeded at least in making it the most colorful. The buildings are painted in one uniform color, a rose pink, which reflects a soft and fascinating light, giving to Jaipur the appropriate name of the Pink City. Being the dream of a mathematician, Jaipur is laid out with the greatest of regularity. The main street is over 100 feet in width and about 2 miles in length. In Hindu religion, which believes that every soul passes through the whole animal kingdom, the cow is regarded as a mother to her worshippers. If she chooses to go walking down the main street, that's her business, and nobody dares to interfere. She is a citizen of the community and a mother of the populace. Perhaps there is no place in the world where birds and dumb beasts live in closer proximity with mankind than they do here in Jaipur. The reason for this may be due to the fact that the Jain religion, a more orthodox branch of Hinduism, which thrives here, prohibits the injuring or killing of anything that lives. The adherents of this doctrine, numbering about 1 million of India's population, would not so much as lift a finger to brush a fly or an insect from their babies' eyes. Moreover, Jains actually support beast hospitals where old or lame animals are housed and fed. Aside from the extremes of religious fanaticism, this kindness to dumb animals seems to reflect itself upon the people of Jaipur, where they are of a contented and peaceful nature, living in a sort of bovine resignation to life as it chooses to deal with them and all that lives around them. The people of Jaipur are naturally vegetarians, as their religion forbids them to eat flesh, fish, or fowl. Consequently, the marketplace abounds in a great assortment of vegetables and fruits. For centuries, Jaipur has been noted for its brass industry, and nowhere else in the world can we find a more interesting variety of handmade brass goods. The streets of Jaipur are like the counters of a modern department store, where one may purchase at bargain prices a conglomeration of articles that are typical of India. Few travelers pass this way without acquiring at least one of the countless objects on display. But if a man is not in the mood for shopping, he may take advantage of the time while waiting for his lady friend by having a first-class shave. Oddly enough, no soap is used by this tonsorial artist. Nothing but a little cold water to soften the beard, a straight razor, and a steady hand. If he so much as cuts his customer the slightest fraction of an inch, the result is a free shave for the lucky victim. No commodity in India is used on so large a scale as cotton, and this is easy to understand when we consider that a vast majority of the population is attired only in cotton cloth, dyed in every color known to man, and usually spread out upon the street to dry, as we see it here. Behind the street life in a more subdued environment are numerous little interiors where beautiful cloth goods are adorned with gold and silver threads, shaping colorful patterns that are characteristic of India. An interesting feature of this intricate needlework is the fact that it is all performed by men. The shops in which these luxurious patterns are designed are usually owned by wealthy proprietors, in the children of whom we see the cultured types of the higher castes of India. Little girls in their cradles are often betrothed by their parents to boys and young men, and it is not uncommon for a girl of 12 years to be married. The mark in the center of this girl's forehead signifies that she is married or about to be married. It is also used by the less orthodox girls as a sign of beauty. In colorful contrast to the high caste children are the street urchins, who are of a lower caste with no more social status than the animals with whom they mingle so freely. And so life goes on in the pink city of Jaipur, where man and bird and beast appear to mingle in a spirit of peace and contentment, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, being one and the same to a people who accept fate as the destiny of life. Strategically situated at the southern extremity of the Malay Peninsula, midway between India and China, lies the free port of Singapore, one of the most important links in Great Britain's chain of empire, where ships from the 7 seas come and go with variegated cargoes, making Singapore one of the busiest and most colorful ports in the world. But behind all this modern activity, there is a primitive side to Singapore, reminding us somewhat of the waterways in ancient China, where manpower takes the place of motor power, and life goes slowly and serenely on its way. Day in and day out, cargoes of hemp, bamboo, rice, and countless other necessities of life are pushed back and forth along this waterway by human beings who render their calloused necks to a service that defies the benefits of modern invention. It is said that Singapore was first settled by Malays about 3 centuries ago. But as a port of any importance, its history begins in 1819, when the island was ceded by Johore to Great Britain through the instrumentality of Sir Stamford Raffles, whose name is perpetuated in connection with many of the local institutions. The present-day Singapore is a thriving city of more than 600,000 inhabitants, most of whom are Chinese, whose residences and places of business form the most colorful districts. Incidentally, the word Singapore is derived from the Sanskrit words Singa, meaning lion, and Pura, meaning place, and in former times it was referred to as the City of the Lions. Prior to the advent of Sir Stamford Raffles, the island of Singapore belonged to Johore, and it is now joined to that state by a picturesque causeway, which was opened in 1924 and is regarded as one of the engineering achievements of the 20th century. This important causeway also provides a connecting link between Singapore, the Malay states, and Siam, making it possible to travel by railway train from Singapore to Bangkok, a distance of over 1,100 miles. Driving over the causeway into the independent state of Johore, we arrive at the capital city, known as Johor Bahru, with a population of over 20,000 inhabitants, living and looking very much the same as their neighbors across the causeway. In fact, outwardly at least, Johor Bahru to us is merely a continuation of the oriental sections of Singapore. Although the rickshaw is usually associated with the Orient, it is said to be an American invention, credited to a Connecticut missionary who found it to be a convenient means of transportation in the more congested areas of China. One of the unique features of the Malay Peninsula is the traffic policeman with wings. We were told that this celestial adornment was designed to save the traffic policeman from overexertion in an extremely warm climate. Generally speaking, Johor Bahru is a quiet and well-ordered little city, abounding in picturesque vistas and colorful settings. The ruling Sultan is regarded as a nonconformist, with broad and tolerant viewpoints on the standards of art and living within his progressive little state. The prevailing religion of Johor is Mohammedanism, and the Cathedral Mosque in which the Sultan officiates is regarded as the most impressive of its kind in the Malay Peninsula. The Court of Justice is another example of imposing architecture, as well as a fitting counterpart of the Sultan's good taste in the conception of his state buildings. Opposite the Court of Justice, we behold the gateway to the Sultan's palace. And just as we are about to enter, an automobile is driven out by a solitary driver who happens to be the son of the Sultan and heir to the Sultanate of Johor, a most democratic and hospitable young prince who welcomes us with a greeting in perfect English and insists that we enter the palace grounds and make ourselves at home, which we do, and the palace itself is the first object of interest to engage our attention. The Sultan, who is a bit of a humorist, told us that he no longer lives in this palace because he was literally driven out of it by curious tourists who were so intrigued by his world-famous collection of stuffed animals, as well as his gold and silver plate, that he was obliged to convert the palace into a museum. And here is His Highness, Sultan of the State and Territory of Johor, one of the most interesting personalities in Malaya, who prefers to be known simply as H.H. And now, while H.H. reviews his efficient little army, let us review his colorful career. At an early age, he was sent to Europe to be educated, and his education was by no means limited to scholastic institutions. His wild and extravagant parties are said to have been partly responsible for depleting the treasury of Johor. After his father's death, he returned to his inheritance, which was a broken-down state with a gloomy future. But he was an optimist then, as he is now. He borrowed $1 million and started the cultivation of rubber in Johor. The results proved so successful that Johor was eventually restored to its original status. And today, thanks to the praiseworthy efforts of its Sultan, it is the foremost state in unfederated Malaya, with an army that is also a credit to the Sultan's genius for organization and finance. In his parting words, His Highness reveals a bit of his former self when he says, "Give my regards to Jeanette MacDonald and tell her she's still my favorite movie star." And that is the message which we take with us as we say farewell to His Highness, the Sultan of Johor. Surrounded by the waters of the Indian and Pacific Oceans, south of China and north of Australia, lies the island of Java, where 45 million human beings pay homage to the flag of the Dutch East Indies, the same flag that waves over the dikes and canals of Holland. We approach Java by way of the old port of Batavia, which was formerly the main approach for all ships, but is now used almost exclusively by the primitive craft of the fishermen, who sail in and out of the various canals leading to the old town. And here is what is left of old Batavia, a picturesque little fishing village, abounding in characteristic scenes which have changed but little since the days of the early Dutch settlers. Very little meat is consumed by the native population. Consequently, fish is a most important food throughout Java. The population of Java is a mixed one, consisting of several different races, and next to the Javanese in number are the Chinese. In fact, these ancient peoples are so similar in appearance that they seem to represent the racial line of demarcation between the Malays and the Chinese. The great bulk of Java's population is distributed over the country in villages, and as soon as a village grows to a considerable size, it sends off a score of families to start another community. Incidentally, Java has a population of about 700 people to the square mile, which makes it the most densely populated island in the world. In spite of the tremendous population, however, food is plentiful. The elements are seldom extreme, and the people as a whole seem to be quite contented. The Javanese by nature are a quiet and peaceful people, more or less subdued by the vertical rays of an equatorial sun, as well as the benevolence of Mother Nature, who has bestowed upon them tropical foods which are acquired in abundance with the least amount of human effort. As a matter of fact, one doesn't have to go to a restaurant to eat, for the restaurant comes to him in this manner, and even a world traveler may be surprised at the combinations of tasty food that are concocted by these itinerant food peddlers. One of the most popular items on the menu is a rice and curry combination, a plate which sells for about 2 cents. About 275 years ago, a great wall was built by the Dutch around the old city of Batavia. And this impressive gate, known as Amsterdam Gate, is one of the relics of the old wall, and it is still in a remarkable state of preservation. After passing through Amsterdam Gate, we arrive in the modern sections of Batavia, where we find more definite evidence of Dutch influence. Local self-government, native participation in administration, economic betterment, and popular education are some of the benefits enjoyed by the natives as a result of the present-day Dutch colonial policy. Due to the many hardships and great sacrifices made by Holland in building up her far-flung empire, she is credited today with being the world's third colonial power. As in Holland, the Dutch have built canals here for the purpose of transportation, but apparently this one has been turned into a municipal laundry. Practically every day in the week, the canals of Batavia are thronged with men, women, and children, busily engaged in washing clothes. In fact, there is so much laundry activity that a visitor is inclined to wonder where all the clothes come from and what there is in the apparently clean atmosphere of Batavia that necessitates such continuous washing. It is an interesting fact that there have been found among the ruins of Javanese temples, over 1,200 years old, stone figures wearing garments similar to those worn by the natives today. The native Javanese dress is called a sarong, and it is usually made of batik, a cotton cloth with a soft, velvety texture, made up in many varieties of color. Brown and old ivory, however, is the combination which appears to be the most popular. Wet clothing is the fashion because it keeps the body cool in one of the world's hottest climates. A 30-mile drive from Batavia takes us to the world-famous botanical gardens of Buitenzorg, where the residence of the Governor General overlooks a lily pond, which abounds in the largest specimens of Victoria regia, ever cultivated by the hand of man. The leaves of these giant water lilies grow to be over 6 feet in diameter, and some of them are sturdy enough to hold the weight of a small child. The flowers are usually large and pink and white. The plant was introduced into Java from South America, where it grows in uncultivated state along the Amazon River. The cactus garden is composed of a variety of specimens gathered from all parts of the world. It is the custom here for visitors to carve their initials in the fleshy skin of this particular species of cactus. At first, the initials are hardly discernible, but with the passing of time, the plant, in healing, develops a coarse, rough skin, which makes the initials very conspicuous, thus preserving the impression for the life of the plant, which may be for several years. In addition to a most interesting variety of plants and flowers, Buitenzorg is noted for its assortment of trees, most of which have been transported here from other parts of the world. This strange-looking tree with its fence-like roots is a native of Sumatra, and its botanical name is Canarium decunianum. When the present king of the Belgians was crown prince, he and his attractive young wife visited Java, and they were particularly impressed by the botanical gardens at Buitenzorg. Later on, when the young queen was tragically killed in an automobile accident, this special avenue of flowers along which she once walked was dedicated to her memory, and it is now known as Queen Astrid Walk. And it is here, in this colorful setting, that we conclude our glimpses of Java. We are in rural Hungary, 100 miles or more from Budapest, where Mother Nature takes on the moods of a pastoral poem and provides abundantly for those who are content with the simpler things of life. Over 3/4 of Hungary's land is devoted to agriculture. Sheep, cattle, horses, and grain are the chief exports, for which Italy and Germany, mainly because of their proximity, are the largest consumers. Wash Day in rural Hungary is general meeting day for the housewives who gather along the banks of picturesque streams and turn the toil of the day into a session of gossip. Geese in particular occupy a most important part in Hungarian domestic economy. They are highly esteemed for the table, and their feathers serve a variety of useful purposes. In the quiet little villages, the inhabitants still cling to the customs as well as the costumes of their ancestors, who walked and talked in these quaint little settings centuries ago, very much as they do today. The rural districts have stubbornly resisted conventional and machine-made clothes. These elaborate costumes, however, are used only on special occasions, not the least popular of which is going to church on Sundays. The predominating religion of Hungary is Roman Catholicism, and particularly in the rural districts, Sunday Mass is the great event of the week. Aside from being a house of worship, the church also affords an excellent meeting place for friends and neighbors who turn out in their Sunday best, animating the lanes and highways with a pageantry of color and style that is typical of rural Hungary. Incidentally, the wealth and prestige of Hungarian peasant girls is often determined by the number of lace petticoats they can afford to wear. Under their colorful Sunday skirts, which may have been worn by their grandmothers, they may wear from 10 to 20 petticoats. Clinging tenaciously to the traditions of old Hungary, these hard-working people represent the backbone of their country, and the simple, healthful, and righteous lives they live are indicative of Hungary's strength and pride of race. On Sunday afternoons, it is customary for the village folk to assemble in festive groups for folk singing and folk dancing. the chief diversions of rural Hungary. And needless to say, it is at such functions that kindred spirits meet and matrimonial matches are made. The national dance of Hungary is known as the Csárdas, and it derives its name from the Magyar word csárda, meaning a roadside inn. Here, the gaily clad peasant dancers enact a subtle drama of love, jealousy, and reconciliation, accompanied by the wild strains of gypsy music. Even in this festive environment, the industrious Hungarian housewife continues with her household duties, artfully blending the spirit of work with the spirit of play. Following the Csárdas, there is feasting and romancing until the late hours of the Sabbath. Then comes Monday morning, and the toil of the week begins again. We are now on the bleak plains of Hungary, known as the Puszta, where horses, sheep, and cattle engage the attention of the Zikos, or cowboys. Aside from providing water for the livestock, the well or watering trough is a meeting place and social center for the cowboys of the Puszta, proud, fearless, self-respecting men who spend their days and nights attending enormous herds of horses, cattle, and sheep which graze on the wind-swept plains. Hungary takes great pride in the breeding of horses, and there are few racetracks in Europe from which Hungarian horses have not taken highest honors for speed and endurance. Like the cowboys of North and South America, the Zikos of Hungary have been romanticized in song and story. Their long capes are made of sheepskin or heavy felt, and they are worn winter and summer in all kinds of weather. It is said that one of these cloaks can outlast the lifetime of its owner. The Zikos are practically independent of the outside world, where they provide for themselves through their own labor most of the food and clothing they require. Many of them are directly descended from the nomadic Asian race of Magyars, who crossed the Carpathian Mountains in search of fresh pastures 1,000 years ago. In contrast to the lonely life of the Zikos is that of the farmers who toil nearer to civilization and commemorate their bountiful harvests with a harvest festival, which takes place each year on the last day of the harvest. On this festive day, the reapers dress in their most colorful costumes and walk out into the fields, carrying with them a huge loaf of bread and the so-called harvest wreath, symbolizing the transmutation of grain to bread. At the close of the day, the harvest wreath is presented to the owner of the fields, and he hangs it over his dining room table, where it remains until the next harvest, which, please God, he prays, may be as good as this one. Before leaving the fields, a very solemn ritual takes place in which the huge loaf of bread is cut up and distributed among the reapers. This ceremony symbolizes the importance of grain in producing the manna of life. Each slice of bread is eaten in a spirit of solemn respect and gratitude, a simple but profound custom, which is a great tribute to these children of nature, who have found in the art of simple living something which all the complicated machinery of modern civilization has not brought to us. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say, farewell to rural Hungary. About 40 miles off the eastern coast of South America lies the colorful little island of Curacao, the most important in that small group of islands known as the Dutch West Indies. We approach this island through the little port of Willemstad, the main street of which is a waterway wide and deep enough to admit the largest boats afloat. The island of Curacao was discovered about the same time Columbus discovered America. It was originally settled by the Spanish, but the Dutch acquired it in 1634. Among the early Dutch governors was the illustrious Peter Stuyvesant, whose name is also linked with the history of New York. Both the French and the English made several attempts to acquire the island, and for a number of years it was a British protectorate. In 1815, however, it was returned to Holland, and to this day it has remained under the crown of the Netherlands. The colorful houses that greet us as we sail by are so Dutch in character that they remind us of old Holland itself. Sailing up Main Street in an ocean-going liner is one of the unique thrills of world travel, and this is the only place in the world where such an adventure is possible. Curaçao's main attraction is the famous Queen Emma Bridge, which opens and closes at all hours of the day for the benefit of the numerous boats that are constantly sailing in and out of Willemstad. The idea of this bridge was conceived by an American consul and built by the Netherlands government over 60 years ago. It is electrically controlled, and it is conceded to be the largest of its kind in the world. Most of the boats that sail into this unique harbor are loaded with crude oil from Venezuela. Oil refining is the island's most important industry, and one of the reasons for this is the fact that Willemstad is practically a free port, while taxes on refined oil in Venezuela are said to be very high. While the bridge is open, a little ferry is in active service for the benefit of those who cannot wait until the bridge closes. Until recent years, a toll was collected from the pedestrians crossing this bridge. And in view of the fact that the fee was higher for those wearing shoes, it was the custom for many of the poorer people to carry their shoes across, thereby avoiding the extra toll. Curacao has become a most popular port of call for visitors who never tire of watching the Queen Emma Bridge as it opens to welcome the numerous ships that sail in with new cargoes and new interest. In spite of its progressive contact with most of the countries of the world and its modern commercialism, Willemstad has managed to retain in its architecture the quaint and colorful atmosphere of an old Dutch town. Pure-blooded Dutchmen, however, are very much in the minority, and there is little in the manners and customs of the native people to remind us of their mother country. Extremely low import duties have helped to make Willemstad a shopper's paradise. Perhaps the best-known commodity to be purchased here is the world-famous Curacao, the liqueur which adopted the name of the island itself. It is made from a particular species of orange, which seems to grow best in Curacao, although it is now being made in other countries under the same name. Curacao is naturally dependent upon the outside world for its food supplies, a large amount of which comes in boats from the neighboring country of Venezuela. Many of the boats are tied up along the piers for the sole purpose of conducting business direct with the consumers. At the native market, we find the types of people who comprise the majority of the island's population. They are mostly Negroes, coming from the same strain that has populated all of the habitable islands of the Caribbean, and not a few of them can trace their ancestry back to the days in which Curacao was the center of the West Indian slave traffic. Freedom of religious worship is one of the features of Dutch government in all parts of the world. And here we find Protestants, Catholics, and Jews enjoying a feeling of brotherhood that is a praiseworthy tribute to Dutch tolerance. The Church of the Rosary, one of the 13 Catholic churches, is a fine example of the many religious institutions in Curacao. The old Jewish cemetery on the outskirts of the town is a reminder of the fact that the Jews have figured largely in the history of the island. There are inscriptions on tombstones here that date back as far as 1640. The Dutch government house is probably the most imposing building in all of Curacao, and among its ancient archives may be found a history of the famous Dutch West India Company, which was one of the Netherlands' strongest arms of empire. Willemstad has a population of about 25,000 people, and thanks to its great oil refineries, it is now one of the most prosperous little towns in the Caribbean. Dutch is the official language, but Spanish and English are both spoken, particularly by the upper classes. The natives usually converse in papiamento, which is a mixture of Dutch, English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Indian. Unfortunately, our visit to Curacao is now drawing to a close, but as we take a few farewell glimpses of the colorful streets and houses, all so reminiscent of that little mother country several thousand miles across the sea, we cannot help but feel a wave of admiration for the ancient Dutch mariners who braved the stormy seas of adventure to expand the boundaries of civilization and spread the great creed of tolerance to the four corners of the globe. Our first and last impression of Willemstad will always be that of the Queen Emma Bridge opening its long arm of welcome, symbolizing, as it were, the hospitality that awaits all visitors to the colorful little island of Curacao. We are in quaint St. Augustine, the pride of Florida and the oldest permanent white settlement in the United States, where the architecture of old Spain has been faithfully reproduced and preserved as one of the most colorful heritages of North America. Approaching St. Augustine by way of the Bridge of Lions, one gets the impression of entering an old world city, in the center of which is the famous Ponce de Leon Hotel, a monument to the memory of the late Henry M. Flagler, brilliant organizer and wealthy railway magnate who devoted much of his time and fortune toward recreating the glory of old Spain in St. Augustine. The patio of the Ponce de Leon Hotel is occasionally romanticized by native descendants of the original Spanish families who don the costumes of their ancestors and proudly bring to life the colorful spirit of old Spain. In the mausoleum of the Presbyterian Church, which he built in memory of his daughter, are the mortal remains of Henry M. Flagler, the great benefactor of St. Augustine. Religion has always been a sustaining influence in the historic development of this quaint city, which traces its foundations back to the latter part of the 16th century and still preserves in the archives of its old cathedral manuscript records which reveal the colorful story of St. Augustine. In the year of 1565, on St. Augustine's Day, Pedro Menendez, with a company of Spanish soldiers and a priest, landed near this locale and established the first permanent settlement in the United States, 55 years before the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth Rock. And this historic event is commemorated today by the celebration of Mass, which is attended by native sons of St. Augustine, who reenact the first Mass as it was believed to have been performed by the Spaniards. Another colorful episode reenacted by the sons of St. Augustine is that of Ponce de Leon in quest of the Fountain of Youth. According to history, Ponce de Leon, governor of Puerto Rico, heard about a miraculous spring located on an island to the north, the waters of which would restore one's youth. And being very desirous of becoming young again, he fitted out 3 caravels at his own expense and set sail. It is said that he landed in this vicinity on Easter Sunday in 1513 and discovered the fabled Fountain of Youth. Whether or not the water he drank made him young again is controversial, but the fact remains that Ponce de Leon immortalized man's eternal quest for the Fountain of Youth, and today in St. Augustine, the spirit of this story is kept alive by the Fountain of Youth, which still flows for the benefit of all those who would travel the path of a romantic tradition. This fabled shrine, enhanced by numerous other relics of St. Augustine, attracts thousands of visitors annually who lift their cups as we do now and drink to the ideal of eternal youth and the joy of living. Returning to the more factual history of St. Augustine, we drive down the oldest street in the city and we behold what is said to be the oldest schoolhouse in North America. Everything in St. Augustine seems to be endowed with an atmosphere of age and tradition, but nothing deserves more distinction than the oldest house, from the balcony of which fly the flags of 4 countries, all of which have flown in their turn over this historic shrine. The old slave market is another of St. Augustine's many historic landmarks. But let us diverge for a moment from the past and turn to some of the modern attractions, one of the most interesting of which is what is reputed to be the world's largest alligator and ostrich farm. We arrive just in time to see what an ostrich does with its lunch. Rare specimens of alligators are featured here, their hides being in demand for the making of fancy leathers. Alligators are the largest living reptiles, and over 6,000 of them are protected and cared for on this farm. In devouring their food, they often roll over and over with it in their mouths, the purpose being to break it or tear it apart before eating it, as they do not seem to be able to chew food as other animals do. And here we meet a colored giant who gives us an exhibition of courage and strength that defies the tall stories that we have heard about man-eating alligators. In a situation like this, the tail of the alligator is more dangerous than the mouth, as most of the animal's strength is in its tail. Returning to the city by way of one of the original Spanish gates, we visit what is perhaps the most interesting landmark in St. Augustine, Fort Marion, a historic structure which was known as Castle San Marcos during the Spanish rule, but was changed to its present name after coming in possession of the United States. Here again, the native sons of St. Augustine lend color and interest to a national shrine, which takes us back to the days when all America was evolving into a land of great republics. The armies of the old world that once dominated our country are to us but the ghosts of yesterday, merely reminding us of a liberation from force and dictatorship, which is now the priceless heritage of all those who are fortunate enough to live under the protection of the Stars and Stripes. En route to Alaska by way of the Inland Passage, often referred to as the Lover's Lane of the Seven Seas, we learn that we are sailing over the longest protected ocean waterway in the world, and we are inspired by the majestic snow-covered mountains that loom about us on all sides. The captain of our ship prefers duty on the upper bridge, as this affords him the opportunity of admiring the scenery, which he tells us presents a different aspect on each voyage. Perhaps the safest deep-sea navigation in the world is in this region, where channels are deeper than need be for the largest ships afloat, and even the echoes of a ship's whistle are sufficient to guide a good pilot through the thickest fog and the blackest night. And now we are approaching the little town of Seward, ocean terminal of the Alaska Railway and gateway to the interior, beautifully situated on the north end of Resurrection Bay. Seward, a modern little city with about 1,000 inhabitants, was named after William H. Seward, who, as Secretary of State in President Johnson's cabinet, negotiated for the purchase of Alaska from Russia for $7,200,000. That was in 1867, and it was referred to then as Seward's Folly. Since its purchase, however, the returns to the United States on the original investment have been about 2,430%. So much for Seward's Folly. Most outsiders are inclined to think of Alaska as a land of perpetual ice and snow, with all its ports frozen in during the winter months. But with the possible exception of Nome in northern Alaska, this is not true. And in the summertime, even though the snow remains on the mountaintops, the swift-flowing streams are not cold enough to prevent visitors from bathing in them with a fair degree of comfort. These young ladies, by the way, are not native daughters or polar bear bathers. They are passengers from the ship that landed us in Seward. And here is our friend the captain, a confirmed angler, who takes a sporting advantage of his ship's 2-day layover at Seward. Unfortunately, the lusty trout are not biting at the moment, and we wonder if this could be one of the reasons. Among the many animals that thrive in Alaska are silver fox and mink, and a profitable business is being developed by those who domesticate and breed these animals for their valuable furs. Here are 2 litters of baby minks, only a few days old. The principal characteristic of the mink is its amphibious mode of life. It swims and dives with ease and makes its nest along the banks of streams, producing 5 or 6 young once a year, usually in April. Vying commercially with the mink are the Alaskan silver foxes, which in their baby state are not unlike a litter of puppy dogs. And here's what happens to the baby foxes after they grow up. "23 miles north of Seward, on the shores of Lake Kenai, one of Alaska's largest and most beautiful lakes, is an Alaskan roadhouse, a haven for weary travelers. There are hundreds of roadhouses in Alaska, but this one is unusual because of the courageous widow who owns it, Mrs. Nellie Lawing, better known as Alaska Nellie. During her 30 years in Alaska, she has cooked, washed, mended, trapped, prospected for gold, driven a dog team mail route, twice acted as postmistress for Uncle Sam, and has been twice sheriff of Kern Creek. Over 15,000 people have written their names on her roadhouse register. Among the visitors, there have been 2 presidents of the United States, many people of foreign nobility, senators and congressmen, and world travelers, including your narrator. The first question that most visitors usually ask of Alaska Nellie is, what was your most thrilling experience? And she invariably answers by showing 3 crippled fingers that date back to the day a giant brown bear chased her into a barn. According to Nellie's story, while closing the door behind her, the bear clawed at her fingers. Later, Nellie shot the bear, and this skin is all that's left of him. Through long years and at thousands of dollars of expense, Nellie has gathered together 1 or more specimens of each animal that has its habitat in Alaska. Her collection of animal heads is becoming famous, and with each head goes the story of how the animal was caught. This particular story, however, is interrupted by the tingle of a little bell in Nellie's kitchen. She informs us that this is her fish bell. And now comes Nellie's famous fishing act, which afforded amusement to the late President Warren G. Harding during his visit here. We may be greenhorns from the city, Nellie, but we do know the difference between a live fish and a stuffed one. Anyway, the idea is all right, and we know the live fish aren't biting today, so we'll forgive you this time. Nevertheless, Nellie insists that the bell idea has been a great success, and in the right season, she has pulled in through her window as many as 50 fish in a day. Aside from hunting and fishing, Alaska Nellie, with all her outward masculinity, has the heart of a true-born woman, as illustrated by her genuine love for flowers, which she cultivates in her own greenhouses. Although Nellie is in her middle 60s, she can still saw a cord of wood as quickly as the best woodman in Alaska. With much reluctance, Nellie occasionally dons a dress and steps out of her frontier woman characterization. Her best friend, she says, is her dog, and of him she has this to say. The Malamute is the king of the trail. He has struggled through with freight and mail. He eats what you offer. He sleeps in the snow. And he stays on the trail when it's 40 below. Of all the multifarious duties performed by Alaska Nellie, none is more significant than that of raising the flag of her adopted land, a flag that was designed by a Seward schoolboy in 1926. And now, as we say farewell to Alaska Nellie, we join with her in saluting this flag, which is in reality a territorial edition of the Stars and Stripes, flying over that portion of our country which was acquired without dispute or bloodshed, and is fast becoming one of our most valuable possessions. When the early explorers first gazed upon that part of the Pacific Northwest, which is now the state of Washington, they saw a picturesque lake such as Lake Chelan in central Washington, which we now behold, peacefully reflecting the blue of heaven and suggesting the familiar expression that refers to this part of the world as the land of the sky blue water. And along with the beautiful lakes and the streams, they saw snow-covered mountains like Mount Rainier, appearing the same now as it did then. And they saw thundering waterfalls like Snoqualmie. But what the early explorers did not see, and probably never dreamed of seeing, was the magic metropolis of Seattle, gateway to the Pacific Northwest and one of the wonder cities of the world. The story of Seattle reads like a tale from the Arabian Nights. For only 60 years ago, it was a remote little village with about 1,000 inhabitants, developing a slow but steady growth through the lumber industry. But in 1897, the discovery of gold in Alaska and the Yukon changed it almost overnight into an important commercial center. Being the nearest United States port to the Orient and to Alaska, Seattle is a natural receiving and distributing point for trans-Pacific and Alaska traffic, and it affords easy access to Atlantic and Gulf markets. The opening of the Panama Canal and the years of the World War, when Seattle built more ships than any other United States port, also added greatly to the city's rapid growth, so that today Seattle, with almost 500,000 inhabitants, is the largest city of its age in the world. Some idea of its recent growth is illustrated in the fact that building permits in the 9 years following the World War represented values averaging $23 million per year. In the span of 60 years, therefore, Seattle has grown from an obscure trading post to a cosmopolitan city with many miles of paved streets and scenic boulevards, numerous churches, parks, and public schools, and many publicly owned port terminals and industrial establishments. Although the discovery of gold was the first great boom to the material growth of Seattle, the substantial old staple that has consistently stimulated its development from the beginning is lumber. And with this thought in mind, let us fly from the city that the lumber industry nursed and fondled out into the open spaces of the evergreen state, where the cedars, hemlocks, and Douglas firs are still growing abundantly, thanks to the intelligent supervision of the Washington lumbermen, who plant several young trees for every old one that is cut down. And here we transfer from our plane to an automobile, which takes us over picturesque highways, typical of Washington State, where wildflowers and indigenous plant life abound in profusion, sheltered by the majestic trees that tower above. At the world-famous Weyerhaeuser lumber camp between Longview and Tacoma, lumber capital of the world, we witnessed the passing of a forest giant which is destined for the commercial marts of mankind. An outstanding contribution to modern logging is the power saw, which makes the felling of any size tree a comparatively simple operation. And now that the great giant takes its last look into the sky that has given it sunshine and rain for the past century or more, and down it comes. So the mighty has fallen. The lumbermen in this part of the world are as much concerned about the growing of a young tree as they are about the cutting of an old one. And in addition to this, they devote considerable time to protecting their forests from fire and blight, so that the reforestation and preservation of Washington's great forests is a responsibility voluntarily assumed by the lumber industry itself. In time, these monarchs of the forest may be the masts of some great ship, or the support of telephone wires, or perhaps part of the lumber that goes into somebody's new home. And now we are back in our transport plane, flying over the busy port of Everett, which shares with the larger Washington cities of Tacoma and Bellingham the reputation of being one of the world's greatest lumber ports. Returning to Seattle, our plane brings us down at the city's airport, near which is one of the largest airplane manufacturing concerns in the country. A particular type of lumber known as Sitka spruce, which grows abundantly in Washington, was a choice premier wood for airplane construction, and thus again lumber was largely responsible for attracting a great modern industry to the evergreen state, even though today most planes are made of metal. Before leaving Seattle, it is fitting that we should give a thought to educational, cultural, and physical development, as they represent the final stages in the progress of any community. And in this respect, Seattle points with pride to her co-educational University of Washington State, where over 12,000 students are now obtaining the benefits of the most modern educational and physical training. And it is here that we meet the world-famous rowing crew of the university, Olympic champions, as well as champions of clean sport and fair play. The record of the successive crews who have trained in these waters has been unexcelled by any other rowing crew. And graduate oarsmen from Washington University now coach the crews of the foremost colleges of the United States. The success of the Washington crew is due to what is known as the Washington stroke. And oddly enough, this stroke was invented by Hiram Conybar, former coach at Washington University, who was not an oarsman himself, but worked out the stroke by theory. A natural feature which may also contribute to the rowing ability of the Washington University crews is the location of Seattle in the midst of numerous lakes and convenient waterways, all tending to arouse and encourage the pursuit of aquatic sportsmanship. In our final glimpses of Seattle, we as Americans from other states join with the citizens of this typically American city in sincerely praising the record of its development, and we leave it wishing more power to it, for it is one of the four vital portals of our country, this Seattle, gateway to the Pacific Northwest and the pride of Washington State. Over a century ago, a company of Russian fur traders under the command of Alexander Baranov, director of the Russian-American Company, established a colony on Baranov Island and named it Sitka, capital of the new Russia that is known today as Alaska. And now, as we sail into the harbor of Sitka, we behold enduring landmarks that recall the days of Russian rule in this remote part of the world. Our good ship, the Baranov, safely anchored in the heart of this historic harbor. We go ashore in tenders, and while en route, we are told that Sitka is the oldest town in southeastern Alaska, with a present population of about 1,700 inhabitants, most of whom depend upon the fishing industry for a livelihood. The fishing industry, by the way, is said to have yielded 3 times the value of Alaska's gold during the past 22 years. The most conspicuous example of American influence in Sitka is this modern building, erected as a home for the pioneers of Alaska, a fitting tribute to the efforts of our country in providing for those who helped to build it, even here. An interesting contrast to this imposing edifice is St. Michael's Church, a landmark of the old Russian days. The former Russian mission house, built in 1842, also provides an interesting contrast with the building adjacent to it, a public school and another good example of modern development on the part of the United States government. These foreboding totem poles, so typical of Alaska, are said to be carved with native symbols of love, thereby forming an impressive gateway to a shaded walk that was named by the early Russian settlers as Lover's Lane. And we are told that not a few of the young lovers who once passed this way now lie at rest in the old Russian cemetery just outside the town, the saddest reminder of Sitka's founders and the thwarted ambitions of Tsardom in this part of the world. Sailing away from Sitka, we take with us the memory of a courageous people who once battled against the greatest odds of nature to establish a foothold upon a land which their rulers ultimately sold for a mere pittance compared with its present value. But American enterprise is making Alaska what it is today, and if there is any doubt about it, one needs only to behold the city of Juneau, the new capital of Alaska, and a concrete example of what the United States is doing by way of developing its frontier territory. A half a century ago, this little modern metropolis was no more than a miner's camp, the headquarters of the first American gold rush in Alaska. It owes its birth and growth, therefore, chiefly to gold mines, although other industries have added greatly to its stability. We are now flying over the famous Alaska Juneau mine, which produces about 12,000 tons of ore daily and employs an average of 900 men year in and year out. These lines of soil that reach out into the water are the residue of gold ore that has been accumulating for years. The Douglas Bridge connecting Juneau with Douglas Island and the city of Douglas was constructed under the direction of the Alaska Road Commission with funds granted by the Public Works Administration of the federal government. In addition to its political importance, Juneau is an industrial and commercial center, serving as a distributing point for the surrounding territory. Its fine harbor is open the year round, thereby providing uninterrupted service for the passenger and freight ships that make regular calls throughout the year. Juneau, with its 6,000 inhabitants, is the largest city in Alaska, and it was named after Joe Juneau, a mining prospector, who is credited with being the first to discover gold here. This modest but comfortable residence is typical of the homes that have been built on the side of the hills that overlook the town, and great pride is taken in the little rock gardens that are arranged and cultivated by the owners. One of the city's most impressive residences is that of the Governor of Alaska. Generally speaking, Juneau now compares favorably with any other town of its size under the protection of the Stars and Stripes. And from all indications, it is destined for a future unlimited in its possibilities. This new $1 million federal and territorial building was completed in 1931, and it now provides a meeting place for the territorial legislature and the United States District Court. En route to Juneau Airport, we pass many fine suburban homes, invariably surrounded with floral fences like this one. The Juneau Airport, a few miles from the city, reminds us of the tremendous part taken by airplanes in the present development of Alaska. When we consider that Alaska, which is 1/5 the size of the United States in land area, is limited to less than 600 miles of railway lines, and most of the automobile highways are only open in summer, we can appreciate the value of the airplane in serving isolated communities. About 100 landing fields, public and private, are maintained in Alaska, and the number is increasing from year to year. Many settlements of less than 100 inhabitants have an average of a plane arrival daily. Juneau's landing field is noted for its acres of purple and blue lupins, which grow profusely throughout the summer, providing a colorful and unique foreground for the snow-covered mountains beyond. Another unique blending of winter and summer is found at the Mendenhall Glacier, the outstanding scenic attraction of Juneau, where the mysterious action of a frozen river may be studied at close range. This prodigious field of ice is 17 miles long and over 2 miles wide at its base. There are several thousand glaciers in Alaska, only a few hundred of which have been named, and the smallest of the Alaska glaciers are larger than any of the ice masses in the United States. And it is here, in this magnificent setting, that we conclude our tale of two cities, Sitka and Juneau, the old and the new capitals of Alaska. Away down under the equator at Bondi Beach, one of the popular playgrounds of Australia, where human beings specialize in the healthier and simpler pleasures of life, a colorful and unique parade is in progress, and it is known as the Parade of the Lifeguards. Life-saving brigades from all parts of Australia take part in this famous parade, and each brigade features its own style of bathing suit. During the surf bathing season, which usually extends from October to April, the beaches are patrolled by members of these brigades who offer their services free of charge. A strict watch is kept on the bathers, and grave danger is often faced in effecting the rescue of persons in difficulty. At club carnivals, members compete in life-saving events, which are more or less dramatized for the entertainment of the vast audiences that witness them. The technique attained by the Surf Life-Saving Association of Australia has been recognized throughout the world, and its motto, Vigilance and Service, fully expresses its purpose: to watch over and safeguard from danger the bathers who use Australian beaches. And now we leave Bondi Beach and start out on a long drive, which takes us through the flower-laden suburbs of Sydney, the capital city of New South Wales, and through well-kept parks, abounding in subtropical foliage, arranged so as to show off unique combinations of colorful flowers and trees. After a few hours' drive through an ever-changing panorama of glorious scenery, we arrive in the region that is known as the Blue Hills, one of the scenic highlights of Australia. This region is noted for the characteristically blue haze which hangs in the valleys at all seasons of the year. It also illustrates something of the vast, uninhabited areas of Australia, a country whose size is seldom appreciated by the world at large. To those of us who used to think of Australia as a little South Sea island, down under the equator, inhabited largely by primitive bushmen, let it be known that Australia is about the size of the United States in land area, although its population hardly exceeds that of New York City, and almost 98% of this population is of British origin. The Australians are an outdoor-loving people, justifiably proud of the many outdoor attractions with which Mother Nature has so generously endowed their country. A story is told about an Australian hunter who picked up a brilliantly colored stone while tracking a wounded kangaroo, and upon investigation found that the stone contained streaks of iridescent opal. As a consequence, opal mining started in Australia, and today it is said that the finest opals in the world are the product of that country, and here are a few examples to prove it. From the state of New South Wales, we now journey to the state of Victoria. And the most delightful part of this trip is taken upon the Spirit of Progress, Australia's new streamlined train, which is the last word in speed and comfort. We arrive at Melbourne, capital of Victoria and second largest city in Australia, with a population of over 1 million inhabitants. The city proper is said to be exactly 1 square mile in proportion, and it is often referred to as the Square Mile City. Here again we are reminded of modern progress and activity, which is a great credit to that branch of the white race that has so commendably established itself down under the equator, over 9,000 miles from its mother country. But geographical isolation has in no way curtailed the modern spirit of Melbourne. In fact, it seems to have helped it, as we find here a general tendency on the part of the people to be ultra-modern in their viewpoints. Civic pride is part of their religion, and all departments of civic service vie with each other in the performance of their respective duties. The fire department band reminds us that Melbourne's firefighting brigades are world famous, statistics proving that they were the first to use motorized power in fighting fire. The mounted police also share equal honors in the performance of their duties, although Melbourne enjoys the unique distinction of having less crime in proportion to its population than any other city in the world. And it is here that we meet the Honorable Mr. Joseph Lyons, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia and one of the leading statesmen of the British Empire. The story of Mr. Lyons' career is the story of Australia. Born in modest circumstances, self-educated and self-made, Mr. Lyons has served his country well in all offices of distinction. He is a true exponent of wholesome and simple family life, being the father of 12 children. And speaking of family life, Home Sweet Home should be the theme song for Australia. For nowhere in our extensive traveling have we found a country wherein home and family seem to contribute so much to the success and happiness of a people as they do in this white man's paradise. In fact, it was a tonic to us to bask again in the freedom and beauty of simple living, so far away from the strife and confusion of countries that have not yet learned how to live in harmony with nature or in peace with each other. Of all the beautiful gardens in Melbourne, there is one in particular which bears unusual distinction, for it has been officially dedicated to the pioneer women of Victoria, the thought of which has inspired us with a song which we respectfully dedicate to this garden as well as to the young ladies of Melbourne.
This that's modern and this old-fashioned garden combined are too divine to be true. They are the theme of the loveliness you dream of, the future that you scheme of for you. She's just a little old-fashioned and yet enough modern, a beautiful bloom in a lovely garden. I'd like the power to paint this modern flower in this old-fashioned garden of love.
The San Francisco-Oakland Bay Toll Bridge, owned and operated by the people of California, was opened to traffic in November 1936, after 3.5 years had been devoted to its construction and it represents a total investment of over $77 million. The city of San Francisco is a strategic gateway to Northern California, as well as an important port of call for ships that sail the 7 seas. Its present population exceeds 750,000 inhabitants. The history of this modern metropolis goes back to the days of the Spanish Padres, who in 1769 marked the places favorable for their missions, and from the calendar of saints and angels drew names to designate the various locations. The Franciscan Fathers named this city after their patron saint, St. Francis, and today the spiritual heritage of San Francisco is perpetuated in its magnificent churches and cathedrals. Outstanding among the famous landmarks of San Francisco is the Golden Gate Bridge, the longest single-span bridge in the world. A significant reminder of the part that San Francisco has played in the staging of world fairs is the Palace of Fine Arts, which still stands on the site of the International Exposition of 1915. A quarter of a century spans this impressive landmark and the Golden Gate International Exposition of 1939 and 1940. Which was built upon a man-made island known as Treasure Island. Among the memorable attractions of this exposition was Adolf Vol1's production, known as the Cavalcade of the Golden West, which vividly portrayed Western development from the dawn of history up to modern times. And it is now our privilege to revive a few of the more colorful scenes from that great pageantry of the West, as it was witnessed by the vast multitudes of people who attended the exposition. In grave contrast with the gaiety of the early Spanish settlers were the picturesque caravans of pioneers from the East, some in quest of the gold that was discovered near San Francisco in 1849, and others seeking a better place in which to build their homes and establish their families. Courageous, determined people were these pioneers, braving long and extreme hardships with nothing to sustain them but faith. Faith in their God and faith in the potentialities of the Golden West. Aside from being a source of inspiration for many of the world's most thrilling adventure stories, the Wells Fargo stagecoach was a most important factor in establishing contact between the East and the West. And following the stagecoach came the great iron horse. Here is reenacted the impressive ceremony that took place over 70 years ago, when the trains of the Union Pacific and Central Pacific first met, and Leland Stanford drove the golden spike which completed the Pacific Railway. We behold the pageant of San Francisco as it was at the turn of the 19th century. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, strolling through the shady lane with your baby mine. She's your Tootsie Wootsie in the good old summertime. Two little girls in blue, lad, two little girls in blue. They were sisters, we were brothers, and learned to love the two. And one little girl in blue, lad, who won your father's heart, became your mother. I married the other, but we have drifted apart. And so the cavalcade of the Golden West, which is synonymous with that of San Francisco, was dramatized at the Golden Gate Exposition, recalling the thrilling story of the American pioneers who blazed the trails of the United States and brought the flags of many nations into the folds of one, the one that now waves jubilantly over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Assemble when liberty's form stands in view. Thy banners make here any tremble. Three cheers for the red, white, and Built upon the site of prehistoric Indian pueblos stands the historic old town of Santa Fe, capital of New Mexico, and the oldest capital city in the United States. It was discovered in 1610 by Spanish explorers who named it Santa Fe, or the City of Sacred Faith, although it was nothing more than an abandoned Indian pueblo when they discovered it. In the heart of the city may be seen the old Palace of the Governors, over which the stars and stripes now wave. Erected before the Pilgrims landed in America, it was the official headquarters of Spanish, Indian, Mexican, and American authorities until 1909, and it is now a museum. Even the modern buildings in this colorful city are consistently in the Santa Fe style of architecture, which was developed in New Mexico by combining features from the terraced dwellings of the Pueblo Indians, the Franciscan missions, and the Mexican-Spanish haciendas. A good example of this unique architecture is this museum, housing interesting relics of the past, gathered by archaeologists throughout New Mexico and the Southwest. The Santa Fe Presbyterian Church is the first modern Anglo-Protestant church to be erected in the New Mexico style of architecture, and it has a motley congregation of English, Spanish, and Indian worshipers. About 70 miles from Gallup, New Mexico, at Cathedral, the students of the State University and the School of American Research are unearthing relics and skeletons in an effort to determine when the Indians first inhabited New Mexico and where they came from. Already these students of archaeology have discovered that Cathedral was an ancient communal dwelling which housed about 1,000 inhabitants, whose manners and customs were remarkably well advanced. Not far from here, in Chaco Canyon at Pueblo Bonito, we find indisputable evidence of a people who flourished more than 1,000 years ago and developed a system of government as well as a drama and a religion so far advanced that they would have made a praiseworthy contribution to history had they succeeded in developing a written language. No less than 1,200 Indians resided here in terraced homes that rose 4 stories in height. The circular rooms, called kivas, were devoted to religious purposes. Even in ruin, Pueblo Bonito stands as a tribute to the architectural skill of a prehistoric people who were deprived of the benefits of modern engineering. In interesting contrast with this deserted ancient city of ruins stands the Pueblo at Taos, where a modern Indian civilization expresses itself through unique architecture and living conditions. It is said that no Indian of Taos chooses to be away from this village overnight, it being a superstition among them that evil will befall him who remains away during the hours of darkness. Indians still constitute about 7% of New Mexico's population, and they are given the benefit of the best in modern education and medical science. But in spite of modern influences, they live their lives in partial seclusion from the white man's world, and the majority of their children are brought up to inherit and practice by preference the primitive manners, customs, and superstitions of their forefathers. Although their white neighbors living in the town of Taos build stairs inside their houses, the Indians in the Pueblo still use the outside ladders invented by their ancestors, and from the roof of the chief's dwelling, the sentinel still calls the laborers in from the fields or hunting grounds, while the ever-busy squaws prepare their cooking in primitive ovens, customs as old as time, but still adequate in the life of the red men of New Mexico. Bordering the town of Taos stands a replica of the former residence of Kit Carson, famous Indian fighter, who is called the Monarch of the Plains because of his great courage and success in conquering hostile Indians. Carson died at the age of 59 years, and his grave is now one of the sacred shrines of New Mexico. Situated upon a high and rocky mesa stands the Pueblo of Acoma, the oldest continuously inhabited village in the United States. During the Revolution of 1680, in a retreat from Spanish bayonets, 7 Indians were cornered on the famous Rock of Acoma, and all jumped off the cliff save one, who lived to tell the tale. The construction of this ancient pueblo necessitated the transportation of huge stones and building materials by Indians, who were obliged to carry or drag their heavy loads from the valleys below, after walking 50 miles or more for their cumbersome requirements. Under the guidance of Friar Ramirez, a Franciscan priest, the Indians of Acoma built this famous mission, the completion of which dates back to the year of 1629. And now we come to a part of old New Mexico which has been set aside for the benefit of the Navajo Indians, the most active and prolific tribe in North America. Even in arid country, the Navajos seem to thrive and prosper, as they are naturally industrious and resourceful, living in a semi-nomadic condition. Over their 14-million-acre reservation, they graze their flocks of sheep, from which they derive no small amount of their food and wearing apparel. In this compact setting may be seen the evolution of a Navajo rug from sheep to loom. An interesting feature of this rug making is the preparation of the wool, which comes in 3 natural colors, black, brown, and white. The gray color is cleverly made by blending the black and white wool together. No race of people on earth have the art of weaving blankets and rugs more highly developed than the Navajo Indians, who derive inspiration for their designs from the manifestations of nature and the symbols of their tribal religions. As it was in the past and probably will be in the future, the squaws of today seem to do the major portion of Indian labor, while their enlightened men enjoy the inherited prerogative of leisure. And here is Jimmy B. Gay, who particularly enjoys a good book and the admiration of a countless number of young Indian maidens, any one of whom would gladly devote her life to his comfort and well-being. And here is the Indian Reservation School in which Jimmy B. Gay learned to read and write. But white man's learning doesn't seem to have made much headway with the Indians, who still prefer the great open spaces and the laws of nature for their maximum pleasure, even as their forefathers did in the golden days when they roamed freely beneath the clouded skies of New Mexico, and all the world was theirs. Just off the coast of Java in the Dutch East Indies lies Bali, the island paradise, home of a strange race that for centuries has preserved untouched not only its faith and language, but also its customs and its characteristics. According to history, about 500 years ago, tribes of religious refugees from India invaded Bali, intermarried with the natives, and ultimately brought about all that is known today as Balinese. The Dutch occupied Bali almost a century ago, but it was not until 1906 that they completely subdued the natives and officially assumed control. Being content with a very small revenue, the Dutch have wisely left Bali to the Balinese, ruling that no foreigner can acquire any of its cherished acres. The chief occupation of the people is in cultivating the rice paddies, for which this island paradise is famous. When the rice is ready to harvest, the whole village joins in the reaping, each person being entitled to a third of the amount he gathers. It is a remarkable fact that the island of Bali, which is but 90 miles long and 45 miles wide, not only grows enough rice to feed its population of over 1 million people, but also exports large quantities to foreign ports. The rice paddies are also used as swimming ponds for ducks, and oddly enough, the white flag that waves in the corner of the paddy serves to keep the ducks in that particular pond. No region on earth is more highly cultivated than the tillable parts of Bali, and no farmers anywhere have been able to excel the Balinese in laying out terraces for the cultivation of rice. Among the foods of Bali, the most popular is pork, and consequently the marketplaces attract a great assortment of pigs, many of which are carried to and from the market in this unique manner. And now let us follow this little pig to the marketplace, where all the necessities that the average household does not produce may be purchased at bargain prices. Bali's exports for the past 50 years have averaged about $2 million annually, and a large portion of this money is said to be buried in tin cans under the Balinese houses. It has been estimated that there is more equally distributed wealth in Bali than anywhere else in the world, and we can appreciate the buying power of this wealth when we realize that a few dollars could acquire all that the average market has to sell. Among the less attractive habits of the Balinese is the chewing of betel nut, which produces a pungent taste and turns the lips and mouth into a vivid red. It is supposed to harden the gums, sweeten the breath, stimulate the digestive organs, and aid the growth of whiskers. Introducing two of Bali's most charming temple dancers, colorful examples of the exotic beauty that characterizes the fair sex in this island paradise. The Balinese are naturally musical, and there are few districts without a community gamelan or orchestra to play for entertainments and religious ceremonies. The chief ambition of little Balinese girls is to become temple dancers, and the training for this begins when they are 4 years of age and continues until they are about 14, at which time they cease to officiate in the religious interpretation of the dance, but they are permitted to indulge in the less serious forms of dancing, such as we see here. Although the women present a most colorful spectacle in dancing groups, the star performers are the men, foremost of whom is Gigi, the most popular dancer on the island. Each community is justly proud of its star dancer and its orchestra, for they are the orbit around which revolves the physical and social prestige of the village. Although the Balinese are not a nautical people, they have developed a small fishing industry, sufficient at least to supply them with all their food requirements from the sea. We have seen how peacefully the Balinese cultivate their land, how simply they engage in the marts of trade, how effectively they entertain one another with music and dancing. And here we behold, in the picturesque setting so characteristic of Bali, the simple life of the Balinese fisherman. An ideal existence, to be sure, but it has been discovered by the roving white man. And already, tourists are beginning to trod the beaches that were only yesterday the exclusive domain of brown feet. When we think of what is going on today in the white man's world, in the so-called centers of culture and refinement, we salute this island paradise, where peace and contentment substitute for diplomats and statesmen. And this is the thought that we take with us as we reluctantly say farewell to beautiful Bali. The atmospheric haze that hangs over the city of Algiers during our visit deprives us of the opportunity to photograph this historic metropolis at its best. But we are able to discern something of the size and modern aspects of one of the largest seaports in the French Empire. For centuries, Algiers was the headquarters of piracy, the meeting place of sea robbers, and the terror of all civilized countries, which it defied with audacity until the settlement of the French finally restored law and order. Under the flag of France, this great Mediterranean port has flourished and progressed, but behind its ultra-modern front is the Casbah, or native quarter, where the atmosphere of ancient Algeria is still apparent, and the marts of trade are endowed with a colorful conglomeration of types, costumes, and personalities. Unlike the Mohammedan women in the more orthodox cities of the Mohammedan world, those of the Casbah do not avoid the gaze of the unbeliever, although they still cling to their Mohammedan veils. Here, the language of France is adroitly blended with the languages of Africa and Arabia, and the result is a strange combination of talkative tongues, all converging at the coffee house, which has the appearance of a first-class jail. No one appears to be very much concerned about work around the coffee house, but not far from here there is a solitary laborer, monotonously pursuing the even tenor of his way, in order that water may flow into the fields of his master. One of the outstanding monuments of Algiers is a recently completed war memorial, which commemorates the heroic part that Algeria played in the last World War, during which she proved her loyalty to France by furnishing about 300,000 soldiers and laborers, over 30,000 of whom gave their lives to the cause of democracy. Perhaps no nation in the world has contributed more to the glorification and dramatization of war than has France, with its colorful Foreign Legion and its national anthem, which is so thrilling that soldiers of all nations are inclined to respond to its martial inspiration. Across the Mediterranean, almost on a direct line from Algiers, lies the romantic little Principality of Monaco, with its famous Monte Carlo, one of the world's most colorful ports of call. The Blue Dome building is the world-famous casino of Monte Carlo, in which fortunes have been won and lost. Formerly, the rules governing admission to the casino were very strict, and all patrons were obliged to wear formal dress. But today, wearing apparel is a matter of personal choice. The Principality of Monaco is under the protection of France, and it is the world's smallest state. It has an area of 368 acres and a coastline measuring only a little over 2 miles. The population of the entire state does not exceed 24,000 inhabitants. The Rock of Monaco forms a peninsula rising nearly 200 feet from the sea, almost on the top of which stands the palace of His Highness, the Prince of Monaco. The building of this famous palace dates back to the 13th century, and its history is as thrilling as the story of Monaco itself. Not far from the palace stands the Cathedral, which was erected in 1874, about the time that religious autonomy was granted to Monaco by the Pope.
Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. For the Lord God omnipotent reigneth. Hallelujah, hallelujah.
In gruesome contrast to the cathedral, we now behold Suicide Rock, over which desperate men and women are said to have leaped to their death into the blue sea below. In spite of all the self-destruction stories that have been associated with this landmark, however, statistics prove that in proportion to its population, there are no more suicides in Monaco than anywhere else in the world. Nothing upsets a citizen of Monaco more than the foreigner's impression that his state derives all of its income and resources from this casino. As a matter of fact, Monaco has a revenue from its post office and its tax on gasoline, as well as a subsidy from France. The casino covers only the balance of the budget. Since 1869, the native population has been exempt from all income tax, and this fact alone makes the Principality of Monaco the most unique state in the world. The picturesque coastline of the Mediterranean leading from Monte Carlo into France and on to the famous resorts of Cannes and Nice is regarded as one of the world's grandest scenic attractions. And for centuries, it has been the colorful rendezvous of romance, intrigue, adventure, fortune, and chance. Many a millionaire has sailed his palatial yacht into the harbor of Monte Carlo, dropped anchor and remained for a season, hoping to better his fortune through gambling for high stakes. And in some instances, both fortune and yacht have been lost at the tables of chance. As we sail away from Monaco, we take our last look at its alluring mermaid, the casino, over which still lingers the memory of the man who broke the bank at Monte Carlo and left a tradition that continues to attract gambling sportsmen from all parts of the world. We are in the great outdoors of New Mexico, where nature and man commune in harmony with each other, and time is only a barometer for human habits. During the past several days, hundreds of covered wagons loaded with Indians from all parts of the West have been slowly rolling over the roads leading into the city of Gallup. For this is the time of the famous intertribal ceremonies, in which over 30 tribes are represented at Gallup, Indian capital of the West, and a colorful rendezvous for red men on parade. is generally believed that the North American Indian is gradually vanishing from the face of the earth. Recent calculations prove that there are actually more Indians in the United States today than were when Columbus discovered America, and many of them still adhere to their tribal religions, customs, and handicrafts. The covered wagons of the white man's yesterday are now the chief mode of transportation for the Indian families of today, and this fact is convincingly illustrated by a glance at one of the Indian parking lots at the intertribal meet. Among the many interesting attractions that are featured at this great gathering is the Navajo rug weaver at work. The Navajo Indians' ability to weave beautiful rugs with no pattern to follow, other than that which they create as they work, is a remarkable achievement, exclusively displayed by the Navajo people. No two rugs are identical, and each one is the same on both sides, another feature characteristic only of Navajo rugs. The Navajo's skill in the handworking of silver and turquoise jewelry is equally remarkable. Turquoise is the sacred stone of the Navajo, and according to tradition, it was first found in one of their underworlds. The making of Indian pottery seems to be the special heritage of the Hopi tribe, represented here by Maria and Julian Martinez, who in their time have molded thousands of the clay ornaments and receptacles that now adorn the homes of visitors, many of whom have seen them at work and patronized their trade. Although the Indians naturally take great pride in their work, in order to encourage them to adhere to the best traditions of their race and to continually improve their workmanship, prizes are awarded for the finest arts and crafts. And here is Kawaya, competing with his Hopi Kachina dolls. These dolls are carved out of cottonwood, and each Kachina is made to resemble one of the Hopi gods. So much for the arts and crafts. Now let us turn our attention to the diversions of the day. This procession features a group of women from the Zuni tribe, an independent tribe that clings tenaciously to their Aboriginal religion, customs, and ceremonies. From the Canadian border on the north to the Mexican border on the south, these red men have come in all their colorful glory, proudly to represent their respective tribes at the head big Indian powwow of the year. And needless to say, one of the main attractions of this grand gathering is tribal dancing under the stimulus of the unfailing Indian drum. To the Indian, the dance is universal and instinctive, the physical means of manifesting every human emotion. Some of these dances have religious significance, but most of them are in the nature of celebrations after a successful harvest. This is the Apache Devil Dance, also known as the Crown Dance, because of the fantastic headgear worn by the principal performers. These Apaches, not unlike the devil dancers of Ceylon, gyrate and pantomime to a weird chant, which they believe will drive away evil spirits. Approximately 75 different Indian dances are presented at the ceremonial. This particular dance is the Pueblo Rain Dance, performed so that the gods will send rain for the crops. And now for the rodeo. Ride him, cowboy! The Cherokee Indians from Oklahoma are particularly proud of Chief Stanley, champion Indian roper. Navajo women join the festivities and engage in a friendly tug of war. Among the many interested spectators at this event is Big Chief Laughing Water from Oklahoma. These Navajos represent the largest Indian tribe, now numbering about 50,000, of whom not more than 10% speak English. Although many of the Indians have not taken very kindly to Christianity, those who have are devoted followers of this faith, and even in their dancing regalia, they adorn themselves with the sacred emblems of their new religion. These are dancers from Taos, New Mexico. It is an interesting fact that not a few of the Indians who are educated in some of our finest schools and universities very often return to their tribes and reassume the manners, customs, and dress of their people in preference to those of the white man. And here is an excellent example of that practice. Two intelligent young Indian girls with college diplomas who have chosen to live as their forefathers lived. And somehow, as we drive away from the intertribal meet, out into the great open spaces again, it is not difficult for us to understand why the Indian, educated or otherwise, inherently returns to the land which gave him birth, as well as all that he needs for his livelihood. For here there is natural beauty and peace. And here, as the poet Browning might say, God's in his heaven, and all's right with the world. En route to Fairbanks by way of the United States Government Control Railway, a 470-mile line between Seward and Fairbanks, we travel over rugged land, its physical contours dramatized by skyscraping mountains, variegated streams, and earth-grinding glaciers. The vehicle in which we travel is called a brill car, and it rolls over the rails with all the comforts of a modern bus. Among the scenic highlights of this trip is Spencer Glacier, a silent river of solid ice, miles in length, slowly but surely gnawing its way through the valleys of the mountains to within a few hundred yards of the railway track. When the glacial snow finally condenses into ice, it is a greenish blue, the true color of ice as the light passes through. Melting ice and snow has fertilized many of Alaska's plains and valleys, and among the most famous of these is Matanuska Valley, the gateway to which, in summertime, is a great carpet of wildflowers. This fertile valley is just a small part of the 100,000 square miles of land available for farming and grazing in Alaska, a tremendous area potentially capable of supporting a vast population. Development of the vegetation resources in this great territory is just beginning, and although most of the land is under federal ownership, private use of it may be obtained subject to reasonable restrictions. Here, perhaps in this land of promise, lies a partial solution to Uncle Sam's refugee problem, for the population of Alaska today does not exceed 60,000 inhabitants, while in land area, it is about a fifth as large as the United States. Verily, Alaska is an empire in the making, for it is only at the inception of its economic development. Where acres and acres of wildflowers now grow, farms may flourish, as this one does a few miles from Fairbanks. The farmhouse is electrically lighted, steam heated, and even air conditioned, And in addition to the large modern barn, there is a granary, a central heating plant, and a cold storage building. Here is conclusive evidence that cattle may thrive in Alaska, where 65 head of Guernseys and Holsteins produce over 500 quarts of milk per day. As there are not yet many cows in this territory, milk sells for about 25 cents per quart, and cream for about $2 per quart. And now we arrive at Fairbanks, known as the Golden Heart of Alaska, the northern terminus of the Alaska Railroad, and the base of supply for miners and trappers throughout the territory. Located almost in the geographical center of the country, Fairbanks has a financial and commercial importance far beyond the actual size of its population of about 4,000 inhabitants, most of whom depend upon gold mining for their livelihood. About 100 miles south of the Arctic Circle, in the suburbs of Fairbanks, stands the University of Alaska, the most northerly university in America, where over 200 students are taught the essentials of modern education. School was not in session during our visit, but we saw in the new buildings that were being erected convincing evidence of the progress and growth of this praiseworthy institution. Not far from Fairbanks are the Placer gold mines, where 9 million yards of gravel are dredged each year, one of the largest dragline mines in the world, employing about 700 men at the peak of the season. The Fairbanks mining area is approximately 30 miles wide and 50 miles long, and since the first discovery in 1902, its gold-bearing streams have yielded more than $100 million, and they are still giving up their treasure. The bedrock is taken up in huge dredges, inside of which the gold is recovered by a quicksilver process, housed in this building. This sign was meant as a practical joke, but your narrator, like most tourists, doesn't believe in signs. The nugget he picks up is made of brass, and it is one of many planted there for the benefit of gullible visitors. But in a bank at Fairbanks, we had an opportunity of photographing a pan of real gold nuggets, valued at $17,000. Years ago, in the wildcat days of gold mining, we heard of phony gold bricks that were passed around for a price. But here we behold the genuine article, real gold bricks, valued at $185,000. Modern gold mining is a far cry from the lone prospector who once traveled with all his worldly goods in a kit upon his back. Here at Skagway, we meet Skagway Joe, who poses for us in an outfit typical of the gold rush days of 1898. One of the most notorious gamblers who figured in the gold rush era of '98 was Soapy Smith, and he is reincarnated here by a law-abiding citizen of Skagway. Another famous character who harkens back to the gold rush days is Mrs. Harriet Pullen, who has preserved in her museum many relics of a romantic and thrilling era. This is a gala day in Skagway, for a boat has arrived with hundreds of tourists, and the local population is all dressed up for the occasion. Among the more colorful types are the Siwash Indians, a tribe that inhabits the northern Pacific coast. There are about 15,000 of them in Alaska, and only a few have intermarried with the white inhabitants. At McKinley National Park, we visit the United States Government Hotel, built at a cost of $350,000 and having all the comforts and conveniences of a modern hostelry in a metropolitan city. McKinley Park is named after the late President McKinley, whose name was first applied to that monarch of mountain peaks, situated in the heart of the great park area, Mount McKinley, known to the Indians as Mount Denali, or the home of the sun, rising 20,300 feet, the highest mountain in North America. The most numerous of Alaska's big game animals are the caribou. They collect in large herds, especially during the fall months when their migration begins. At such times, they are easily hunted, and those killed are a fundamental source of food. But as far as we are concerned, we will always associate caribou with the majestic grandeur of Mount McKinley, the scenic highlight of alluring Alaska.
Sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home, on my old Kentucky home, far away.
In Kentucky, where the Cumberland River picturesquely wends its way, we recall that it was the fertile valley of this stream that attracted the early settlers to establish their homes in the Bluegrass State, the first state west of the Allegheny Mountains to be admitted into the Union. This historic river rises in southeastern Kentucky and flows for about 700 miles before it empties into the Ohio River. And among its scenic vicissitudes, none is more picturesque than Cumberland Falls. Kentucky has a population of over 2.5 million inhabitants, and the majority of them live on farms and depend upon farm produce for their livelihood. One of the most famous landmarks in the state is Fort Harrod at Harrodsburg, a pioneer stronghold which provided the earliest white settlers with refuge and protection from the Indians. This quaint structure is a duplicate of the original. In an old burial ground near the fort lie the mortal remains of the first white child born in Kentucky, as well as many of the courageous pioneers who gave their lives in defense of their families during the Indian Wars. This monument is dedicated to the memory of Henry Clay, one of the foremost political leaders of the country, who endeared himself to Americans by his excessive patriotism and his persuasive oratory. Even before Clay's activity in Kentucky, Daniel Boone, famous for his courage and ability as an Indian fighter, marked the wilderness trail through the Cumberland Gap, and his grave today is one of the noted shrines of the Bluegrass State. Perhaps the most famous landmarks in the state of Kentucky are the little log cabin at Bardstown, the duplicate of the one in which Stephen Collins Foster composed his immortal song, My Old Kentucky Home, and the home itself, which stands nearby. It was while visiting relatives here that Foster was inspired to compose his masterpiece, which now associates itself with every old homestead in Kentucky.
Weep no more, my lady, oh, weep no more today. We will sing one song for my old Kentucky home, for my old Kentucky home far away.
Although Stephen Foster was not a Southerner by birth, his immortal songs were inspired by the Old South and its colored folks.
Oh, I hear the gentle voices calling, oh, Black Joe.
The breeding of thoroughbred horses is a tradition in the state of Kentucky, and almost from the time the average child is able to walk, he is taught to ride a horse. It is not unusual, therefore, to find entire families literally born to the saddle. Most of Kentucky's original settlers were of English, Scotch, and Scotch-Irish descent, and they brought with them an innate love for horses, which has become a cherished tradition in the bluegrass state. After a brisk ride, there is nothing quite as refreshing as the ever-popular mint julep, made and served in the good old Southern fashion. In the picturesque paddocks of Kentucky, one may see an interesting variety of horses, standard bred and thoroughbred. Although a vast majority of Kentucky's better horses are bred for racing purposes, a number of them are reared for farm work. And in this connection, splendid specimens may be found at Spindletop Farm near Lexington. These famous Percherons were regarded as the finest examples of their species in North America. They are a breed of draft horses originating in Perche, an old district of France. In interesting contrast with this huge Percheron is the fascinating trotter who still holds a conspicuous place on the racetracks of Kentucky.
She was bred in old Kentucky where the meadow bluegrass grows, and her coat is soft and silky like the petal of a rose. She was bred in old Kentucky, and her elders mighty lucky, and she lives where the bluegrass grows.
And here is the chief of Spindletop, an American saddlebred prize winner with 5 distinctive gaits and one of the longest tails ever grown by a horse. On Faraway Farm, we see the colts of the Wonder Horse, Man o' War, who has been a great success in the breeding paddocks as a sire of many of the champions on the tracks today. 21 colts were sired by Man o' War in a recent year, and the total value of these yearlings was estimated at $1 million. And now let us meet Man o' War himself. Affectionately known as Big Red, this famous horse in his day was proclaimed as the greatest that ever ran on American turf, and many track records were shattered by him. In Kentucky, great horses, like great men, are revered after death as they were during life. And among the graves of famous horses at Elmendorf Farm, we find those of Fair Play and Mahuba, father and mother of the great Man o' War. Overlooking these graves is the statue of Fair Play, a fitting symbol of Kentucky's regard for its famous horses and the traditions of the turf. We have arrived in the harbor of Cap Haitian on the north coast of Haiti, between Cuba and Puerto Rico, where the flagship of Christopher Columbus was wrecked in 1492. At that time, the land was inhabited by a friendly tribe of Indians, but they soon gave way to the Spaniards, who in turn surrendered to the French, so that at the present time, Haiti is the only Latin American republic in which French is the official language. Today is market day, and along the roads leading to town, there is a constant procession of colored folk, all traveling with one purpose: to buy, sell, or exchange something in the marketplace. During the Spanish and French rule, thousands of slaves were brought to this island from Africa, and later, thanks to the liberty, equality, and fraternity platform of the French Revolution, many of these slaves were set free, and out of their ranks came the leaders of revolutions that ultimately freed all the slaves in Haiti. And the greatest of these was His Black Majesty, King Henry Christophe, of whom we shall hear more later. The marketplace at Cap Haitian is a rendezvous for merchants and customers alike. Prices here are very reasonable. Avocados, for example, sell for a cent apiece, green peas a pound for a penny, and bananas are practically given away. The town of Cap Haitian was formerly the capital of the Republic, and during the reign of King Christophe, it reached the height of its glory, but today it is only the ghost of what it used to be. Although a vast majority of Haiti's 3 million inhabitants are colored people, there are a number of mulattoes or mixed bloods and a smaller number of pure whites. Most of the mulattoes are French in language and education, and although they may have absorbed from their Negro ancestors much of their African mysticism and superstition, they have also inherited many admirable qualities of the early French settlers. The Haitian Army now consists of about 200 officers and 3,000 men, all under the command of the President of the Republic. Many of these men are descended from the soldiers of King Christophe, of whom sensational stories have been told, such as the one about the regiment that marched off a 300-foot precipice because Christophe did not command them to stop. And this was done, it is said, for the benefit of a courier from the court of Napoleon, who had questioned the loyalty and obedience of Christophe's soldiers. Among the notables of the French court who formerly resided in Haiti was Pauline Bonaparte, the sister of Napoleon, and this is the site upon which her sumptuous residence once stood. And now we behold the famous Palace of Sans-Souci, built during the colorful reign of His Black Majesty, Henry Christophe, King of Haiti, and one of the most remarkable men ever produced by the colored race. Born a slave about 1765, he became a leader in the Haitian slave uprising, was made president of Haiti in 1807, and was crowned king 5 years later. The valley in which this palace is situated was paved with marble tiles brought from France as ballast in the king's coffee ships. Costly works of art and French mirrors line the walls of the corridors, and the throne room shone with a magnificence of gold and silver plate that fairly dazzled all beholders. King Christophe had many fine palaces in Haiti, but Sans-Souci is the one where he held his court and where his queen and royal family resided. The domed church, which stands near the palace, was the royal chapel. Although Christophe himself was hardly a religious man, he wisely concluded that rule without religion would be too difficult, so he made the Roman Catholic faith the official state religion, but with complete toleration of all other creeds. Not far from here, like a medieval fortress upon a mountain peak, stands the great citadel of King Christophe, one of the architectural wonders of the world, and a sinister reminder of the Black Napoleon's power. The building of the pyramids of Egypt was nothing compared with the miraculous construction of this fortress upon a perpendicular mountain peak over 300 feet in height and more than a half a mile above sea level. Picture, if you can, an army of black workmen under the yoke of a black despot, lugging and hauling 500,000 tons of building material up the mountain from the sea, with nothing but the brawn of their sweating bodies to aid them. The finished job on level ground would have been a great architectural achievement, but upon a peaked mountain rising from a tropical jungle, verily it matches, if it does not excel, the building of the Egyptian pyramids. Henry Christophe's mighty citadel now serves as an attraction for tourists who have only recently discovered it. Here there were garrison quarters for 10,000 soldiers and a royal suite for Henry and his queen. It is said there is a secret underground tunnel that leads from the citadel to Sans-Souci, and that there is buried somewhere beneath its fortress 1.5 million pounds of sterling. Only the king and his mulatto engineer knew the hiding places of the citadel, and as soon as it was completed, it is alleged that Christophe, deliberately pushed the engineer over the edge of this parapet. "365 cannon, one for each day in the year, were hauled up to the citadel to be fired upon an enemy that never came. Christoph himself directed the only shot that was ever fired from here, and that destroyed an unfortunate Negro who was sleeping under a tree in the valley below when he was supposed to be working, confirming the fact, as it were, that Christoph was allergic to laziness in his people. In 1820, after 14 years of despotic rule, Henry Christoph was stricken with paralysis. His subjects, demanding his abdication, revolted against him, and realizing that his reign was over, he shot himself with a golden bullet. Deserted by his own people, his widow and 2 daughters, with the help of one loyal friend, dragged his huge body from the palace up the mountainside to this spot and threw it into a pile of wet lime so that his enemies could not desecrate it. And so, here lie the mortal remains of His Black Majesty, Henry Christoph, the mightiest monarch of the Negro race. Although he was powerful and clever, he was as despotic as the pharaohs who built pyramids. And now that all the fanfare that attended his life has subsided, Haiti has taken root again, and her people are going forward, progressing admirably under the guidance of democratic government. Nevertheless, the sun never sets in the harbor of Cap Haitian, that a voodoo voice in the wilderness of Haiti does not cry out, "Viva Henry Christoph!" And it is said that it comes from the ghost of Henry Christoph himself.